I still was trying to figure out why my brother wasn't around. That's when we decided to report him missing. I mean, at this point, I feel like he is not alive, and that I don't know how that happened or what happened.
A veteran from Arkansas goes missing, and it takes his siblings several months to put the pieces together. Once they do, they're wondering, why can't they trust the words that they're hearing from his wife and even his children? It's time to turn on the searchlight for Shannon Lee Collins. Welcome back to Brain Scratch Searchlight. I'm John Lordan. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope you enjoyed your 4th of July, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to do today's story. We are talking about an Army veteran, someone that put themselves into a position to protect our freedom, something that we were all celebrating yesterday. And now it seems like he needs help. He needs to be found, or we need to understand what's happening in this case, and it might be an instance of justice being needed here. But let's go ahead and start with an article just to give some context to what's happening in Arkansas, and it features some words from Shannon's sister that we saw at the start of this video over at thv11.com. Currently, there are nearly 500 people that have been reported missing in Arkansas. At the annual missing persons event in Benton, Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin announced that his office was forming a new cold case unit. If you get one family reunited or get answers for one family, you're going to make an immediate impact, he said. Holly Beckwith, a family member who attended the event, shared that her brother, Shannon Collins, has been missing from Pottsville, Arkansas. Beckwith joined other family members in carrying a lantern and observing a moment of silence for their missing loved ones. She said that she hopes the new unit will help give her family more options as they continue looking for her brother. I'm hopeful for what can come from that, she said. Maybe some more resources for us to be able to use if it keeps continuing on like we're dealing with. What is she talking about? Well, we know that there's a lot of questions about the information that she's hearing from Shannon's family, particularly his wife and the children that were living with them. Does law enforcement feel the same? We're going to get into all those details as we go through this story, but let's start with the NamUs entry. Here we have a picture of Shannon. Date of last contact, March 12th, 2021. And this is part of what is very tricky about this case. The date of last contact is March 12th, but the missing persons report was not opened for several months after that. So of course, once you get investigators looking into this, they are way behind the 8 ball on this. They're having to play catch up in a very, very significant way. Missing from Pottsville, Arkansas, 48 years of age at the time he went missing. He would now be 51. And in terms of critical details, he is a white Caucasian male standing between 5 feet 8 and 5 feet 10 inches tall, somewhere around 220 to 240 pounds. Not a lot of details in here, even for the circumstances of disappearance. On November 29th, 2021, person reported that he and his family had not seen or spoken to his brother, Shannon Collins, since February of 2021. And that person is obviously his brother, Blake. Blake is the one that reached out to me asking for coverage on this case. He's been asking a lot of creators in this space. I think there's been a couple of podcasts that have done some work on this so far. And there is essentially enough of a collection of articles that I think we can get kind of a gist of the word that law enforcement wants to put out about this case. But Blake has also gone further. He's put together his accounts of why he's having trouble trusting some of what he's hearing from Shannon's family. And really, he's put together a timeline that is very solid. He's done a really, really good job. And please understand how this is super, super difficult for family members that are being directly affected by having a missing loved one. He's trying to lay out items that are known facts and then kind of his interpretation about what that means. So I've gone kind of even one step further and really tried to drill down to, okay, this is kind of the hard cornerstones of this argument that we could lean into. So we're going to do our usual thing. We're going to go through the articles first, then I'll let you know that we're getting into the family sourced information so you can kind of keep it in your head in terms of what sources you believe are more reliable or what conclusion you're really leaning towards. But I think you're going to be surprised along the way, especially with the point of view that law enforcement seems to put out as this goes on. Brown hair color, blue eyes. We have no real clothing description, no other information about any medical conditions that he might have. His brother didn't relay. I asked specifically if there was any kind of medical stress, anything that, he had maybe recently heard about a new diagnosis or anything like that. Nothing that his brother was aware of. I also asked for a little bit more of a backstory about Shannon, which we'll get to in a moment here, and kind of weave in with one of the articles that was able to pull up just a little bit about him as a person. But here we can see a picture of him in uniform. He worked in supply. Basically, he was ensuring that the soldiers had all the supplies and gear that they needed when they deployed to various regions. He worked in the Army for over 20 years, honorably discharged. I believe there might have been some type of medical issue or something like that, but honorably discharged after serving his time. Here we have another picture of him in a much more kind of casual setting as well. And let's learn just a little bit about Pottsville, Arkansas, where this is happening. Pottsville is a city in Pope County, Arkansas, and as of the 2020 census, the population was 3,140. We're talking about a fairly small town. As a matter of fact, they say downtown here. They even put that in quotes. Take a look at this picture. One little row of buildings for the downtown area is what it looks like according to this photo. And for a population of 3,000, I bet that's pretty close to accurate. It's surrounded by Russellville to the west, Atkins to the east, and Crow Mountain to the north. And of course, we have a missing person former military. If he wanted to leave, could he have headed out to other states? Absolutely. I think it's important that we share this story everywhere, but really, if you have friends and family in Arkansas, I know we've got a big friend of the channel that lives in Arkansas, actually close to this, please share this video with them. We're looking to really help raise exposure and get people talking about this case in that area. We've only got 3,000 people that live in that town. Odds have to be pretty decent that someone knows something or that someone heard something. I know a lot of those smaller communities can have very, very active rumor mills. Maybe there's a little piece of information that can shake loose from you sending this video to someone and that gets called in, and you never know. That could be the thing that actually helps move this case forward. Let's jump over to rivervalleynow.com and learn a little bit more about Shannon. On November 1st, 1972, Shannon Lee Collins was born in Batesville, Arkansas. Shannon enjoyed a typical childhood along with his siblings and extended family. He attended and graduated from Russellville High School in 1991 and later served his country as a soldier in the United States Army National Guard. Shannon was later honorably discharged from the military at the rank of Sergeant Major after 24 years of service. I did also ask his brother just about Shannon on a personal level. What kind of things was he into? And Blake told me that he loved sports. In particular, he's a big San Francisco 49ers football fan, and he loves the New York Yankees in terms of baseball. A man that really loves his family, loves his church, loves to socialize and make friends with anyone and everyone. And that's information that kind of comes through from the family very strongly. This is the type of guy that after he got out of the military, he had a job where he would be doing deliveries and he'd be driving for long periods of time. He'd call up his parents. He'd be on these drives for hours. He would talk to his family for hours. And he's really the type of person that would do that more so than any type of text messaging. As a matter of fact, Blake seems pretty clear in the information he's putting out that, all of a sudden it seems like Shannon starts using text messaging and Blake is saying that is completely out of character. He never was really a person to use text messaging. He's the kind of guy that would like to get on the phone with you. I've also seen comments from people that are saying that they're friends of his online, saying that, hey, I've messaged him. I haven't heard anything back. He has something to say. Shannon always has something to say, and he always gets back. So type of person that when it comes to social dynamics, he's a big beacon in terms of that type of communication. And of course, once we have March hit, that communication kind of falls off. And you might be wondering, well, if that's true, then why did it take the family so long in terms of coming to grips with the fact that he was actually missing and filing that missing persons report. We'll get into that once we get to the timeline that the family has put together and all those notes. And it's absolutely, it's reasonable what they went through, based on basically what they were being told, till it got to the point where it was kind of silly and it just wasn't making sense anymore. And that's when they acted. Keep in mind, his family lives hundreds of miles away at this point. So his brother's clear off in another state. Let's continue at rivervalleynow.com with a different article they have here. Pope County Sheriff's investigators continue to seek whereabouts of Shannon Collins. So what's the basic story here? Collins is a military veteran who was reported missing by his brother in late November of 2021. Based on the investigation, it was learned that Collins was allegedly last seen by his wife on March 12, 2021, walking from his home in the Pottsville area. Investigators have been unable to confirm any sightings or contact with Collins after this date. So that's what law enforcement initially is putting out. Hey, we heard about this really late. We went and asked his wife about it. She said he walked off from the home, and that was that. Now, there's kind of a inferred question, I think, that you could come up with in that, which is, you've been married to this guy. I believe they were married for over 20 years. He goes walking off from the home, and you don't bother to tell someone about that or file your own missing persons report. Based on the story we hear from her, there was some communication still happening around there. We'll get to that. Now, keeping in mind, law enforcement doesn't hear about this until November. We get to the 1-year mark of his disappearance only a few months after that. Thankfully, it kind of helps because, the anniversaries of these events are always a new news cycle. And that's basically what happens. We have local news kind of take to the story again. Pope County deputies continue search for missing veteran 1 year after disappearance, although only, 4 months after they learned about it. Saturday, March 12th will mark 1 year since Collins was last seen. According to his wife, Collins walked away from their home in Pottsville in the morning hours. 9 months later, Shannon was reported missing by his brother, who lives out of state. Pope County deputies say Collins' mother, father, brother, and sister are fully cooperating with the investigation. Those family members have asked for the public's help in locating Shannon. Due to suspicious circumstances surrounding this case, deputies say foul play has not yet been ruled out. And once again, just kind of reading between the lines of these articles, there's some big things we can take from this. Number one, his mother, his father, his brother, and his sister fully cooperating. They're stating that as a clarifying statement, I think, for a good reason. It seems like his wife is not cooperating with the investigation. And what is the makeup of the family at home? Essentially, we have his wife of over 20 years. They have a son together. He is also the stepfather of a daughter that she had from a previous relationship. I don't know if the daughter is living at home during this time. She's of that age where she's about to get married. We're going to hear about that. Both these children, adults at this point, both of them have been married since. But for some reason, law enforcement, even in how they're putting out this information, they're being kind of clear that, hey, we've got this side of the family over here cooperating. We've got something different happening over here. And I think it's fair to make that assumption based on how this is worded. But let's go ahead and continue with a post directly from Pope County Sheriff's Office themselves. The last day investigators can account for Shannon is March 11th, 2021. Shannon's wife, son, and daughter informed investigators that Shannon walked away from their Pottsville home on the morning of March 12th. During the initial and only interview the wife participated in, she gave false and misleading statements to investigators. Now, that is as clear of a message as you would ever hear from law enforcement. They basically, that's as much as you'll get from them. You will not hear from law enforcement the actual details. Well, we know she was lying because of this, and then we knew that. If they're speaking this strongly, it was blatant, and they're trying to get the information out there that, hey, look, we can't trust this person for some reason. That's not to say, look, there's different possibilities in terms what could have happened in this case, but what law enforcement's being very clear about here is his wife is not helping us find the truth in this. Investigators attempted to obtain follow-up information from Shannon's wife and children, but were advised that they had obtained counsel and wished to speak to investigators no further. They've provided no information since to help further the investigation. So they got lawyers. And what's interesting in that is I sometimes hear it, and it's phrased in these posts in this way where it makes me wonder, like, okay, so what? They lawyered up. Well, then what's the next part of that process? You're not going to get them to be able to talk to you, but there's other things you can do, right? Can we get a warrant? Can we do that? We'll find out some more about those follow-up things once we get to the information that Blake is submitting here. And keep in mind, we're trying to look at this through the lens of what law enforcement is putting out through the media at this point. That strong message from the Facebook post seems to continue as we get into our next article here at THB 11. New details released. An Arkansas Army veteran has been missing for 3 years, and investigators are saying the details surrounding his disappearance aren't adding up. Collins' sister, Holly Beckwith, said his wife and kids claimed he was traveling and were in contact with him. So now we're starting to get some understanding about why his family they're basically, it seems like they're being pacified for a period of time in terms of him being out of contact with them. They're hearing from his wife, no, we're in contact with him. He's traveling. We know that he was already doing a job where he was traveling to do deliveries. So it seems possible, seems feasible, seems like a way that you're going to have his brother and sister not necessarily go and try to file a missing persons report. His sister even says, they came down to visit me just in my dining room and I had a good visit. So literally his wife and kids shows up and she's like, yeah, but where's my brother? According to Beckwith, she and her other brother believed the story for a while, but after months of not hearing from Collins, they informed the Pope County Sheriff's Office. Lieutenant Jacob Yarbrough has been working on this investigation. He said that conversation with Collins's immediate family, the wife and the kids, haven't been successful. We went back for follow-ups and they weren't talking to us, he said. They said they wanted counsel, and even to this day, we welcome them to come down and talk to us. I think that's a bit of a tricky proposition when, they've kind of put the word out that they're not being straightforward with us in some way. But yeah, come talk to us. And honestly, I think it's fair to say that if there's some misunderstanding, if there is some reasonable thing, the police misunderstood something in that interview, how do you clean that up? Go ahead and go talk to them. Have your counsel there with you. There's nothing to stop you from sitting down with your attorney. They can advise you during the actual conversation. Go ahead and answer that. Don't answer that. Let me answer this for you on this one. That's not impossible, but we don't have that happening in this case. And we're now talking years after the fact. And that is dropping this big fat question in all of our laps. Why? Police are saying they're not being straightforward. Why? She didn't report him as a missing person. Why? They might have been lying to his siblings to try to stop them from reporting him as a missing person. Why? And again, it's hard to know because, look, there's different things that could have happened here. First thing, possible self-harm situation. I'm not saying that I believe this. I'm just looking at things that might have happened that might cause people to act in bizarre ways. Self-harm situation. They want it covered up because he's getting some form of payment from his time in the service, and someone wants those payments to keep happening. One potential thing there. He leaves of his own accord and they truly don't know where he is. But again, there's some form of payment coming in. They don't want that to stop. So, hey, let's go ahead and not file that missing persons report. We've seen cases where dynamics like that have come into play. And it's hard sometimes when you're being lied to, it sometimes makes you assume the worst. And it might not be that far. It might be bad enough. It might be some form of funny money situation that is even criminal enough to pull together this conspiracy of family members that are going to say, hey, we got to circle the wagons. We can't let people really know what's going on here. But could it also be the worst case? It could be. So obviously we have to stay open to all possibilities here. And it's hard to know because even for all the information that Shannon's brother has been able to pull together, still figuring out what actually happened is just, it's not, based on my take on that documentation, it's not quite in the equation. There's clearly something wrong. Law enforcement's being clear about that already through the media. That's going to continue as we get into Blake's information. And it seems like his family's doing something wrong. There's some reason why they're being this way, that more than likely, you could almost say 95 to 99% chance someone has done something that they're trying to hide. Now, how severe is it in terms of legal charges is obviously a very big question. If we're talking about, they were receiving his payment after they knew that he had been deceased or something like that. One level of bad. They tried to hide his body to keep receiving those payments. Now that's moved to a different level of bad. Someone possibly harmed him to make that situation happen. Now we've gotten to another degree of bad. So there's all these different kind of degrees in terms, but the outside still looks the same. It doesn't matter which of those degrees. It's just someone has decided we need to hide the truth about this. And it seems like they might not be great at hiding the truth at this point. Or maybe they are. We're years down the road. I don't know. Let's continue with the information here. So at this point, law enforcement even ups the ante again. The Pope County Sheriff's Office released an update saying that investigators are looking at this case as a missing person with foul play involved. So they're dropping the foul play term in there. And for those degrees I was just talking about, that makes me think that they have some form of information that's making it look like at least the possibility of hiding a body, or possibly worse. I don't know that I would consider accepting payments for someone that's deceased foul play, or even to the point of, look, his family has told them that there's some form of communication that he's still having with his wife and possibly children. What would that be at the most? Some form of identity theft or something like that. I don't know that I'd really consider that foul play as well. So here it seems like law enforcement is kind of assuming that something far worse has happened. Now, what about the possibility that he left of his own accord, that he just wanted to restart his life somewhere else? We have an official press release from the Sheriff's Department here. To this date, there have been no leads from the public, nor family or friends that would suggest to investigators that Shannon is living elsewhere or even left the Pottsville area. The investigation includes many different agencies and spans into other jurisdictions. Investigators are looking at this case as a missing person with foul play involved. Attached is a photo of Shannon taken on March 11th, 2021, the last day that investigators can account for his whereabouts. And this is the photo. We've been showing it right below me on screen. Last known photo of Shannon. Over at Today in Fort Smith, Dennis McCaslin asking an interesting question. What's hindering the investigation? The family of a missing Pope County man says the ongoing lack of progress, as well as pushback from local public officials involving recent social media comments, has them wondering about the direction of the ongoing investigation into the disappearance of their relative. Shannon Lee Collins would now be 51 years old. Now, a family member has stepped forward and said that they believe the evidence clearly shows what happened to Collins. You can access that 58-page document by clicking the link below. That is the document that I have gone through, and I've whittled down to kind of a concise timeline. I've reached out to Blake with some additional questions. I've fused that together in this review as well. But please know from this point forward, we're not looking at media-sourced information, and we're not looking at information that is law enforcement's press releases or comments. We are now looking at information that a family member is sharing with us, that being Shannon's brother, Blake. So to start the timeline, October and November of 2020, there's a bit of a family dispute that happens around COVID and the fact that Shannon's stepdaughter has a wedding coming up. Shannon was upset because his parents weren't going to travel for that wedding. And basically, the parents had some medical issues going on. The doctors are saying, on top of that, we've got COVID. You should not go to this event. And they were heeding that warning. So for someone that was usually in high communication with his family, this did create a little bit of a rift. Shannon was telling his parents, I'm really upset about this, and I feel like I'm not going to talk to you guys anymore. And that happened. We know that happened. He's around for a few months after this. So there was a rift kind of in the family that happened there. So as we get to the holidays, Holly, his sister, goes to visit Shannon's family for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Of course, Shannon is around at this time. He's cooling off. He's basically starting to reestablish his connections with his sister and his brother. They're starting to speak a little more regularly. Then we get to March 11th, 2021. He comes back from an out-of-town work trip. They have electronic data that confirms, first of all, that he does make it back home that evening, but also in the house at that time would be his wife and his son. His stepdaughter is not there in the evening. She does apparently show up the following morning. That next morning, he was scheduled to start another job. He was on another delivery run. He didn't show up. And it's worth mentioning that his new son-in-law, so the person that married Shannon's stepdaughter, actually worked for the same delivery company that Shannon did. March 17th is Shannon's son's birthday. And effectively, Shannon's father, the son's grandfather, called to speak to his grandson and wish him a happy birthday. And his grandson says, quote, "We're about to sit down to a family dinner." Now, what's interesting about this comment and what Blake is weighing this against is we know by March 17th that Shannon's already missing. So why would the son tell grandpa we're about to sit down to a family dinner? It sounds like the son's trying to allude to, dad's here and we're about to go sit down to dinner now. Blake is putting a bit of stock in that. That quote for me still it's loose enough that it could be interpreted different ways. And I don't know if I would, hedge an argument on the fact that, he's lying to us because he's saying his father's there. It's not exactly the same as, oh, I just saw dad in the front yard. But enough to be suspicious about? Absolutely. And in light of everything that's going on around this, for sure. The possibility that the grandson is being deceptive here, I would certainly put in the list of considerations. It's not, for me personally, it's not a super, super strong point to hold on to. Combine it with everything else. I mean, this is an over 50-page document that I've went through for this. It's an interesting piece in a trend that we're seeing from a lot of family members where maybe they're not being honest. April of 2021, Shannon's wife and stepdaughter visit Holly. So now we have Shannon's family effectively going the other direction to see Shannon's sister. She directly asks, so Holly asks, "Where is Shannon?" And Shannon's wife states that he left the family. She says that he was taking pain medication and he wasn't thinking straight. And he must have also lost his phone because he had a new number. But he's communicating with them, but using some new phone number. They also ask Holly to basically deceive the rest of the family and just say that he's been traveling for work, to not even share this information that supposedly he left the family. But then we get to May, and then a new story emerges. Shannon has checked himself into a hospital, is what is now being said. He is communicating with the family, so that hasn't changed, but now he's talking to them via text message. And the family, his wife and kids, want to avoid it being awkward after he works out his issues and comes back home. So again, there's kind of this tone of like, okay, well, he's actually in a hospital. He's had to check himself in. He's dealing with probably some type of mental break or something along those lines. But so, let's maybe keep this down a little bit. July. Shannon's wife, son, stepdaughter, and his son's girlfriend, who they have since married, they go to Holly's to celebrate the 4th of July. Both Shannon's son and stepdaughter quietly tell Holly that they didn't want to talk about Shannon because the son's girlfriend wasn't aware that Shannon had left the family. which is weird because apparently someone speaks to her later and she's like, oh no, I know he hasn't been around. So we're not exactly sure. I'm not sure, even based on reading through that whole document, why they would even lie in this way. But soon after the visit, Holly asks the stepdaughter about what phone number Shannon has been actually texting from. And the stepdaughter says, oh, it's the same phone number that he's always had. So for some reason, the stepdaughter doesn't seem to know that it's a new phone number that she's being texted from by her father, supposedly. Shannon's father contacts a police department in a different city. They say they can't help. The brother makes an anonymous post on Shannon's church website mentioning that he hasn't been seen. So like we mentioned at the start of this, Shannon very big into his church. And basically the brother is trying to kind of shake things up, get people talking, maybe get some information to flow out about what's going on with his brother. Sister Holly invites the family for another holiday weekend, but she hears nothing back. So now we're starting to see a bit more separation between Shannon's wife and kids and the rest of the family. November 1st is Shannon's birthday. His family tries to message him, no responses at all. His sister Holly asks about Thanksgiving. Are the wife and kids going to come out for Thanksgiving? She gets initially a response saying that, life's kind of difficult right now and they're not sure if they're going to come or not. And then after that, all communication just basically stops. They wind up not getting together for Thanksgiving, which is like the first time in, I guess, over a decade that has happened. And then we get to late November. Now, NamUs said the 29th. This timeline says the 30th, but we know it's the end of November. Shannon is finally reported missing by his brother, Blake. Sheriffs question his family and review his wife and son's cell phone. The wife says that he walked off. He didn't take any of the 3 cars that are registered to him that were on site. He didn't take any money. He didn't take any belongings. The police would go back and talk to her again. And at that point, she says she's not talking and she wants a lawyer. Thankfully, as I was kind of mentioning earlier, they do take that next step. They have a search warrant and they basically say, let us in, we're taking a look. So I did ask Blake for some more details on this. He says that he knows that they did take electronic devices. He's not sure what else in terms of possessions from the house. They did check the home. The home is on a full acre. They did check the vehicles. They actually even impounded one of the vehicles and it's still in impound today. So it might be fair to assume that there was something interesting about that vehicle for some reason. That's why they took it. Maybe there's been more testing that's been conducted on it since. They did search a second family property that's 20 acres and it's about 15 miles away from Shannon's family's home. 20 acres, significant area. We don't know how much time they've put into these searches. We really don't know the details in terms of resources. 20 acres is big. So it's hard to tell. I don't know if they took cadaver dogs out there. We don't know how big the search efforts are. For a town this small, admittedly, we're talking a sheriff's department and for the county, so they're going to have better resources, bigger resources effectively. But how many people could they have had out there for the search? I just don't know. They did wind up digging up parts of the backyard that they took as evidence to test, Blake also shares with me. So in February of 2022, as we're getting close to 1 year of him missing, Blake basically sends a kind of text message appealing to Shannon's son. And it's effectively phrased in a way that it's trying to let his son off the hook and basically just say, hey, look, I know you're probably wrapped up in something that people are telling you to be a specific way or something. It doesn't have to be like that. You need to do what's right. You need to kind of step up. Effectively, he does not hear anything back from his nephew. March of 2022, Blake speaks to the son-in-law on the phone. And he finds more inconsistencies in the stories. Based on what Blake says about that conversation, it's almost like in that initial conversation, the son-in-law didn't really put the pieces together. But as Blake is kind of detailing, like, don't you think this is weird? Don't you think this is weird? Almost the son-in-law kind of starts agreeing with him in some way. But then that trend of maybe the son-in-law is going to become helpful in some way, or maybe push back against his recent bride in some way, just rolls the other direction. And basically Blake's further future communication with him doesn't show that trend anymore. So Blake finds more inconsistencies in the stories, and ultimately this would wind up being the last contact that he had with anyone in that pocket of the family. Shannon's wife tells police that she saw him walk away from his house with no belongings, no car, no money, nothing. But when investigators spoke to his stepdaughter, her story is different. She says, because remember, she wasn't there on the night of the 11th, but she did show up on the morning of the 12th. She says that when she shows up, she sees Shannon getting into a car with a friend and leaving the house. So we have a discrepancy there. What's interesting is the stepdaughter's story has information that could potentially be verified. Law enforcement could ask her, well, who's this friend? I don't know if maybe the stepdaughter is saying that she didn't know the car or didn't know the friend, but obviously Shannon did. Maybe that's why she's calling it a friend. But how would you know if it was a friend versus, someone picking you up for a ride share? So I'm curious about that aspect, because it seems like that story has pieces that could either be verified or verified to be untrue, which we know some of this information law enforcement tried to validate and said, hey, look, we know they're lying to us. We don't know why. There is some mention in this documentation. This is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it leads to an important consideration that we've kind of touched on already. There's some mention that Shannon's wife might have asked a friend to help her hide $16,000. It's a little bit of a rat's nest where it goes from there, but I do think it's an important implication in terms of talking about money with this. He had pension payments that were coming. They would come automatically into a joint checking account that he shared with his wife. Those payments kept coming until he was reported missing, and effectively they were stopped at that point. So that shows at least some motive for potentially hiding the fact that he was missing. And that's where we get back to those different conditions I talked about before. I'm not going to retread all that. But it's also got me thinking about the consideration of, I'm sure there's some form of life insurance policy that would be on him as being a part of the military. And I've seen some commenters talking about this, saying that it could be something like $100,000 or, and even his pension should roll into being some form of aftercare for his spouse. But all of that would only be triggered if he was declared deceased. And that's where all of a sudden my meter about those level of crimes that are going on here starts to shift. Because if it really was a case of Shannon, for some reason, decided he didn't want to live anymore, he walked off into the woods, and that's the last they saw of him. They didn't want anyone to know because they wanted his pension to keep coming. Doesn't quite hold up when you look at the actual logistics of how those things should roll over and work if he is declared deceased. Unless there was some type of clause that would, invalidate it if he had ended his own life. I don't know. But this is just making me think that for some reason, money is some form of component in stopping him from being reported as a missing person. I can't imagine that it isn't. Like, why else? And possibly worse. Possibly there's other criminal acts that are wrapped up in that. What could have been going on? Well, Blake shares some information that he thinks that is important to this case. And it seems like it is. The marriage might have been on the rocks. Basically, the investigation would uncover that on Shannon's last known business trip, he was visiting a woman that he had been seeing in Memphis, Tennessee. He had also spoken to his family about the marriage ending and the fact that he was actually waiting for his son to graduate college before he was going to go through with that. It's also believed, and this is what Blake is saying in the documentation, it's believed that Shannon's wife knew about this other relationship. There was also a message, one of the last messages sent from Shannon's cell phone, went to this woman in Memphis, Tennessee, basically saying, I'm okay. And Blake is questioning if that was Shannon or not. But there was some communication that happened that night after he got home between, at least, I think it's a Facebook message or it's his cell phone and this woman in Tennessee. Blake says that investigators found that the supposed text messages that Shannon was sending to his wife and children from that new phone number were actually being sent by his wife. Now, of course, keep in mind, this is all the notes that I'm getting from Blake. We don't have law enforcement stating this as fact, but Blake is telling us, based on what he's been told, investigators found that that new phone number was information that was actually coming from his wife. He says that police have proof that she purchased a new phone from a local store using cash, and that's the phone that's been used for this communication since he's gone missing. That is supposedly Shannon that is texting his family. Where does this leave us? I mean, all that stuff sounds very compelling. We know they're holding on to a car for some reason. Is there physical evidence that's tied around that? Possibly. Where is this going in terms of prosecution? As of now, the local prosecutor doesn't feel that they have enough to bring charges. However, Shannon's siblings have been informed that federal prosecutors have become involved. And this, I believe, is tying back to that aspect of the money. This guy is former military. If we have his funds being taken, that could be federal level crime. If we have his identity being impersonated, again, that could be federal level crime. So even outside of if it can't be proven that he was murdered or something to that effect, there's other potential crimes that have happened here that might be easier to prove, might get the investigative ball rolling, and allow for discovery of new information that might help additional charges as well. So it seems to me that's why federal prosecutors would be involved at this point. I think law enforcement probably told them, hey, we think there's been some funny stuff going on with federal funds in this particular case. Would you guys take a look at this? At least that's my opinion of why they might be involved. It could just be that, they're asking for further assistance from federal prosecutors, but we'll see. It seems quite obvious what happened to Shannon. These are Blake's words. He is gone from this world and he is never coming back. We love him, we miss him, and we know we will see him again in the next world. Now, that part I think is hard to argue with. I think there's a very good chance that Blake is right there, that Shannon is indeed gone. The piece that's missing from all of this, and don't get me wrong, Blake did an amazing analysis and, like I said, did his best to be fair, separating kind of hard-nosed facts versus his interpretation of the facts, and his phrasing was all very, very good about that. We just don't know what happened that night at the house. That's really what it's boiling down to. Was he really seen the next morning by his stepdaughter? Is that a possibility? I guess it's possible. Could he have driven off with someone? All those things become less possible when we look at the stories that aren't holding up, the information that law enforcement is finding, and the fact that law enforcement is saying, we know they're not being honest with us. So that's where this thing gets really, really sticky and really, really hard to untangle. Thankfully, Blake has done a really good job in terms of presenting this information, reaching out to people, asking for more help, more coverage on this. This is one of those cases that needs it. So please share this story with friends that you have, particularly in Arkansas, but I say share it wide, share it everywhere. There is a Facebook page that has been put together by the family as well. Let me bring that up here. I'll have a link to that in the description box down below. Come here, give them a like, show them that you're supporting them. You can also stay updated with all the latest developments on the case here. And if you have any information that you want to pass along to Blake and the family, you can email shareshannonstory@gmail.com. shareshannonstory@gmail.com. Of course, if you have tips, you got to use that number that I've had on the screen through this whole thing. That's for the Pope County Sheriff's Office. That's 479-968-2558. Blake, thank you so much for trusting me to help share this story. Thank you for all the additional information you shared. And Holly, if you happen to see this, please know that our hearts are there with you guys. We're sorry that you're dealing with this in the way that you are. We're sorry that people that have been part of your family for decades, for some reason, are turning their backs on you at this time. I honestly can't imagine a harder pain to deal with outside of having my brother missing on top of that. So We're really sorry for what you guys are going through. A big thank you to the people that help support us and keep us here helping these families in need. Thank you, PayPal supporters Roxanne Brown, Brandy Fry, and Larissa Mertshank. If you would like to become one of those supporters, please visit LordanArts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even buy us a coffee like Amy recently did. We can't do this, especially with the limited commercials that we always have on this channel, without your help. So please consider becoming one of our supporters today. Take care, everyone. Have a nice weekend, and we'll see you again here next week on the LordanArts channel.